I'm Taban Sharesh, founder of the Lotus Flower. I am a child genocide survivor. In 2016, I launched the Lotus Flower to support women and girls impacted by conflict and displacement. And at that time, we supported a lot of Yazidi women and girls who were survivors from the ISIS conflict. These women had been raped, sold on as sex slaves, imprisoned, and had all witnessed family members be killed in front of them. A lot of these women were plagued with terrible trauma and flashbacks and had no sense of closure, nor any sense that the perpetrators would ever be held accountable.
This place bears the scars of 5 years of horror in this region.
Around 2017, one of the Yazidi women survivors who comes to our centres regularly recognised her ISIS captor in the media, and he happened to be a known Australian national. He had first travelled to the Middle East using a fake passport, and she told us during the attacks he had imprisoned her in his home and repeatedly abused her. Now, we knew these fighters were still out there, and the sense of injustice felt by the Yazidi women was immense. This made us think, what if this survivor's evidence could be used to open doors to some kind of legal redress or compensation?
Taban Sharesh came to us with a woman in one of the camps who had been harmed by a foreign fighter, an Australian. Under international law, victims of rape and human rights violations are entitled to reparations. Other women corroborated her story, and they were living in Germany. The experiences of all 5 women of rape, slavery, violence tied into the fact that they were all perpetrated by an Australian national. So it was important for us to try and use the domestic criminal injuries compensation scheme that was available in Australia to try and implement international law into domestic law.
The Australian courts tried to fight our anonymity of the victims.
This was horrific given the circumstances that they had experienced. And obviously, contrary to international law, women who experience sexual violence in conflict are automatically entitled to anonymity.
We showed negative consequences such a disclosure might have to the victims. In the end, the court followed our arguments.
Alongside this battle, we developed a proposal that we are advocating to be used domestically and internationally, whereby frozen ISIL assets and financial penalties imposed for breaches of sanctions and terrorist financing legislation are used to fund reparations for victims.
Les survivantes et survivants de viols en temps de guerre et d'autres formes de violences sexuelles liées au conflit ont besoin et méritent la réalisation de leurs droits.
Companies have been fined millions, but none of this money goes back to the victims. There needs to be a more sustainable way of ensuring victims are able to rebuild their lives. In the US, for instance, there was recently a seizure of millions of dollars of terrorist-controlled cryptocurrency. The US court has ordered those funds to go to US victims of terrorism, but the Yazidi victims are still yet to receive any compensation. In the UK, we know that there is at least £100,000 of ISIL assets frozen, but there is no policy on what happens to these funds, which might eventually either be returned to their owner or be held indefinitely. It seems to us, therefore, that there is an international policy decision to be made to find a way to repurpose those assets. Our policy papers and advocacy are now being debated at the highest levels, including the Global Coalition Against Daesh, which comprises of 83 nations.
Pour laquelle je suis heureux que le Fonds mondial pour les survivantes, survivants et le cabinet Hogan Lovells ait décidé d'organiser cette table ronde.
The amount of work that went into this project is absolutely unbelievable. And what's even more amazing is the pro bono support that we've received from it from day one.
This action has been supported by barristers, NGOs, academics from across the world. We've relied on 100 pro bono lawyers from 5 different countries. The case in Australia has had 5 appeals to reach the highest court in New South Wales.
This case, by the time it got to the High Court, was really about jurisdiction. What the High Court said and what all the other intermediate courts along the way said was if someone who happened to be from Australia went overseas and did terrible things, that's a problem for them, but it's not necessarily a problem for the Australian government, and it's not a problem for the Australian people.
We are now at a point where we have to go into the international law forums to address this matter. We need to see international law implemented, which has been in existence since the Second World War, but is not being implemented in 2021. If we succeed, it has the potential to change the way victims of sexual violence in conflict, crimes against humanity are seen, are perceived, and are recognised across the world.
Really, science is so simple. Each country has a duty to provide reparations, and if such crimes are financed internationally, then surely the right thing for each country to do is finance these reparations with the money they make from sanction breaches.